Hi and welcome. My name is Michel Baumann. I'm the Partner Technical Lead for Microsoft Teams Rooms in EMEA. Welcome to the technical session of the Partner Enablement Program. Mind you, these are the fundamentals. We have a deep dive bootcamp available for you in the link below. Today we're going to show you the basics. Over to Mo and Rob.
Thank you, Michel, for that introduction, and I'd like to welcome you all to our basic technical training for Microsoft Teams Rooms devices. I'll start off by introducing myself. My name is Mohammed Khalifa. Everybody just calls me Mo, so feel free to call me Mo, and I am a partner technical strategist for Microsoft Teams Rooms devices across Europe. And with me, I have my colleague, Robert.
Hi all, I'm Robert Karlsson. I'm the same type of role as Mohammed, and I'm called Rob and based out of Sweden. So this technical course, as we've said, is a basic technical training. You will be able also to have the boot camps coming up that are very much more dense into hours and different topics. So we'll try to run you through some of the things that we think it's important for you in your role to be able to articulate with your customers and to have a knowledge about. But also, of course, go for the boot camps and use them as your source for knowledge as we move along as well.
Absolutely. And I guess, you know, the first thing to start off with anything to do with Microsoft Teams Rooms is to make sure that you have the correct network. Now, of course, there are many, many different variables that could affect network readiness, depending on the type of customer, depending on, you know, what type of technology or what type of Office 365 deployment they may have. But what we will do today is we will give you the very basics of what is required. So, Rob, what are the basics? What is required for network readiness for Microsoft Teams Rooms devices?
I think first, we just would like to highlight that Microsoft as a company is one of the largest providers of black fiber and backbone internet. So we really have that much of amount, capacity, and quality for you to really leverage that network for you and for your customers. So having the possibility to transform your customers' data into the Microsoft network is crucial to have the best experience. So bear in mind, Microsoft is one of the two largest providers out there. With that, normally we try to just visualize how the connection is between the customer side and to be able then to reach to Microsoft network. And many times you have a view of how it's set up, but actually this is how it works. So you have your corporate network as a customer where you transition the traffic from the computers, from the rooms, from everywhere, and normally also using some sort of a VPN solution that then transfer this traffic from the peering sites or the local sites into a centralized egress point into the internet. From the internet, Microsoft then have connection points where we then connect to the different ISPs around the world. So we try to stay as close as possible between our network and the global IP providers out there. And what we would like to do then is really to make the customer understand how to optimize this experience and move from the traditional setup where you combine your local sites into a central point, and then, as I said, move them out from there and use a long way from the local sites into a central site. Imagine if you're a global company and you have these different countries connecting to like a European egress point instead of having local breakouts in each country. That's a lot of unnecessary traffic that you need to shuffle around. So our recommendation is to move from this perhaps traditional way of doing it into this way, so that we really minimize the amount of time that the traffic for the customer stays both within the corporate network and on the internet, because then we can transform this traffic out to the Microsoft network, and that's really to get the best experience for your customers. And mainly, if a customer has been using Office 365, been using perhaps regular Office services like Outlook, like Excel, like other things, this has perhaps not been an issue for them because they have not been really transferring that amount of data that is real-time enabled and really needs to have this quality. So it could be something that the customer needs also to reevaluate as they move along. They made some sort of basic setup when they started to use the Microsoft 365 services, but now when they're starting to use more and more telephony and meetings that are time critical, they might also go back to you and say, hey, could you help us? We need to find where we have the congestion points, where we could do some things better than when we designed it in the first place. So having real-time data really also tests the customer's setup that they have done before. So optimize the networking, use the ways to really minimize this and move with your customers as a guided and trusted advisor in this case. So you could really be that one to help your customers either when they're doing new installments or, of course, when re-evaluating, when they are uploading more and more data into the cloud and having more real-time traffic on this. So I just want to say that this is crucial. We have a lot of documentation that we really don't have time today to fill, but use that and go and be the trusted advisor of your customers. And also use the help of Microsoft in this case. So we have a lot of local competence out there. The Teams TS is the ones that really could support you in this case when you're doing your new customer discussions.
Yeah, and when we do look at kind of the connectivity aspect of it, it is quite key, and it is probably the biggest pain point most customers will go through. We always try and recommend to our customers that when you look at Microsoft Teams Rooms devices, although some of them run on Windows and others run on Androids, do not treat them as a Windows device. Don't treat them like you would typically a laptop. Most organizations, when you're bringing a laptop into, a new laptop into a network, there's a whole bunch of different policies and things that you need to add and firewalls, etc. Those do not apply for a Microsoft Teams Rooms device. Treat it as an appliance device as opposed to a traditional Windows desktop or laptop type device. Of course, the key thing is to try and get a local breakout to the internet as soon as possible. Microsoft Teams Rooms do not need access into your network or a customer's network. They effectively just need access to the internet. So we generally say to our customers with complex environments, try and create a VLAN. If you create a VLAN, then you're sitting off the network, and create a VLAN which has, your meeting room devices across there. But just like as Robert said, there's a whole range of different types of configurations out there. Do reach out to your Teams TS or your solutions expert to go into a bit more detail. So hopefully you've learned a bit about the basics when we look at infrastructure. But once we look at infrastructure, the next thing we want to look at is really about kind of the room design and kind of the components that move into room design as well. And when we look at room spaces, that's the first point that we need to look at is the room spaces. There's a whole range of different rooms out there, from huddle to small rooms to medium rooms, all the way up to large types of meeting rooms. And when we look at these different types of rooms, we need to look at not just the size of the room, but also things like materials. What's the acoustic like in the room? What are the tiles like across there? Do you have glass kind of walls? If you've got glass walls, there's considerations to take around sound bouncing off. The people outside of the room, do you see them? Is the sunlight going to be bounced? There's a whole range of different considerations. Of course, when we look at Teams Rooms or Microsoft Teams Rooms, these can also scale to even the larger rooms and also into auditorium spaces as well. And when we look at kind of the right-hand side picture, that's actually Satya Nadella's room. And, we have certain tiles that we put up there to help with noise, with noise cancellation, seating microphones, etc. So really, really important that when we start looking at rooms, we are looking at the size of rooms, we're looking at the types of room, the meeting room persona, and the basics in terms of kind of the acoustics, the lighting, the build materials, where the cable runs are, and whether you can drill into the floors as an example. But Robert, let's take a bit more of a detailed look into room assessment.
Yeah, of course. There's a lot of things to consider here, and you are the experts, of course. So you have this knowledge since before, or you're gaining it, of course. And there is no, of course, difference from a traditional meeting room, having components in there, and a Teams room from that perspective. You need to understand what are the things that you have in mind when doing this. Of course, doing that also makes it very important that you document and that you together with your customer do this documentation and finding the best solution for you. And what are the caveats, of course, having different room types as well. And moving on to, wrong direction. Moving on to this, use it and use your knowledge to share this, because depending on how this room has been set up before, you might also need to reconsider things. So in this case, we're using a traditional setup with a long table like this and also having the chairs in between. And that's not always the best way to do this, depending on what type of room layout and what we would like to do in these rooms as well.
And I think just to add here, room assessments are also known as site surveys as well. Yeah, there's different terminologies depending on where you sit in the world. For us, photos, photos, photos. Super, super important. Make sure you take pictures on the existing room and how it's laid out. Look at the conduits, look at, kind of the acoustics, the way the ceiling is built, where the doors are, where the network ports are, as an example. They're really, really important to look at. So not just taking a picture of the screen and the table, but also the ceiling, also the floor, also where the sockets are on the network, and look at things like the walls. Are the walls weight bearing? So if you are sticking up, let's say a 86-inch screen on the wall, are they weight bearing? So you're able to put a standard VESA mount up there as well. What types of brackets are you going to be using? So they're really, really key when we're looking at site surveys and room assessments as well.
And perhaps adding on to that, there's also different roles that you need to take in a project, because you have the expertise, you have the knowledge many times, but you also need to work with the customer in a good way and to use their competence and their local knowledge. So using that role that you have as being a system integrator, but also defining quite well early in the process, what are the expectancies that you have on your customer? How should they help you? What can they do for you in a good way? And also engaging, of course, with the right type of stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we start looking at standardizing is quite key, because with Microsoft Teams Rooms devices, because they're that same consistent experience across the board, regardless of device type, a lot of organizations now want to create standards. So whether you look at small rooms have the same type of device, medium rooms have the same type of device, large rooms have the same type of device as well. It's super, super important that we go ahead and standardize the rooms, not just by size, but also by meeting room persona. So if you're having a look and you're saying, hey, we want to collaborate in this room and use whiteboarding in there as well, then you'd have a different standard for a collaborative type of room versus a standard meet and present type room. So really, really key to look at not just the physical aspects of the room, the size, the layout, the connectivity in the room, and what the materials are in terms of how the room is built out, but then looking at kind of the Microsoft standards of what a meet and present type room and the types of equipment that go in there versus a meet and co-create type room as well.
Yeah, and I think not to forget in everything about that is that you also have a vital role to play with your customers, educating them, getting them to understand the value of these devices and this service that we're bringing to them. And different a bit, I would say, compared to how it was in the past. Then we had Skype for Business and we had 3-year solutions, and when we did some repetitive or some minor updates, I would say, every quarter. In Teams, we are updating each month with new features, new solutions coming out, small and larger. And for a customer, that might be a bit hard sometimes to follow. So I think you, as a partner, you have a vital role here to play to educate your customers and to be there with them and to imagine for them how to use these new features that you are aware of and you know how to use, so that they're really using their investments of Teams rooms. So follow them along, educate them in the first, when starting to get the devices into the offices, but then continue to follow them and be that advisory to really get them to benefit from what's coming continuously as updates and new features to Teams rooms.
I guess just to add on to that, Robert, Teams Rooms devices are pretty straightforward. So from a customer perspective, for them on how to use a device, that's quite straightforward. And yes, deliver some training sessions. But where the most important sessions tend to be are with the IT guys. Where do they find out what the release notes are? Where do they find out what new updates are coming and what new features are being pushed down the line? So users the next morning are not completely surprised with any new updates. And of course, Microsoft over the last couple of years, we've been doing tons of updates on the Teams Rooms platform, bringing more and more different features like Front Row across. So it's super important to ensure that you stay educated and you are educating your customers along with that as well. Robert, let's take a look at components. So what does actually build up a Microsoft Teams Rooms?
Well, firstly, you have some sort of control. That control is where you interact with the solution. You enter your room, you see your meeting booked on that console, and you go up there and just press join, as an example. These controls, they come in different form factors, in different solutions. It might be a solution that also contains microphone and speaker in the same box, or it's just a console for interacting with the service. So it could be different versions of it, but all they share the same software and the same graphical interface. That's Microsoft's interface that we are then putting on these devices. So that's the most, I would say, visual thing that you see when you enter a room. And then, of course, you might have other ways of interacting. You might have an Android-based solution where you can go up to the screen and use that one instead and to start your meeting or to invite other people. Or even you might actually have a remote control in some solutions as well. But we really think that having a console on the table is a large differentiator for that ease of use and that experience to just go in, find your meeting and press join. I would say that's the best experience.
I totally agree. And of course, you need something to power that device as well. So, we have what we call compute. And compute effectively is what holds the OS, and that is the part that effectively powers the machine. Now, 9 times out of 10, compute is hidden away. It will be hidden behind a screen, up in a ceiling, under a table. So you'll find that. But however, when we look at different devices, we do also have what we call all-in-ones as well. So some devices have a compute at the bottom or right next to the touch console. When we look at Android-based devices or all-in-ones, they tend to be all integrated into a single unit as well. So compute, when we look at Teams Rooms, the 2 biggest or the most important components are the touch console that sits in the middle of the table and the compute, which is hidden away, but that is effectively what powers the device. Now, of course, we need additional components to kind of build out the room. So we have a whole range of different cameras made available, and we can spend hours and hours and hours talking about different cameras and all the different kind of features they have. Unfortunately, we're not going to do that today, but you can reach out to your Microsoft account manager or reach out to your OEM partners, and we can absolutely go through in a bit more detail what each camera does. But when we look at cameras, considerations that we really need to start to take into effect are, what does the customer want to do? And what type of room are you in? So in some cases, when we look at things like certain cameras and field of view, how large is the field of view? Is it for a wide room? Is it for a narrow room? Look at the tables. What are the tables like? Is it a long table? Do you need individual framing? Do we need acoustic fencing where we want the sound to be blocked after a certain area? So a lot of cameras today are also built in with speakers and microphones all built into a single unit. So again, considerations need to be taken into account on not just the room type, but the type of meetings that take place there, and certain things like, hey, we don't want any sound coming past this line across here, or we need some intelligent recognition going on across there. But of course, cameras don't just stop there as well, right? We have what we call content cameras made available as well. And if you joined our sales session, you would have learned exactly what a content camera is. It effectively is the ability for you to be able to use an analog whiteboard and digitize that ink and bring it into a meeting room space. And the example that you see across here is one of my colleagues using a whiteboard and using an intelligent camera where they're effectively digitizing that ink. And even if you stand in front of that camera, it kind of ghosts you and you can see right through you. It's an amazing experience. And of course, we have a whole range of different content capture cameras made available. Key thing to note, these devices need to be certified. So make sure you are selecting Teams certified devices. So a content camera can be separate from the actual main camera in the room, which would capture video.
Right. And there's a setting for that in your console to define that content camera. So it's a specific setting as well to define what camera you have. Of course, then moving on from the visuals to the audio, you have a lot of different ways to implement audio solutions and those components. And it could be everything from the built-in solution where you have the video, the compute, and the audio built into the same device. Or you have the tailored solution where you have a ceiling microphone, a ceiling speaker, really being able to, build up the experience where you can go into the corner of the room and speak into the corner, but you can still be picked up because the microphone has such a fantastic way to really define the room layouts and what's the elements of where to stop picking up and such. So you can tailor this experience a lot differently depending what type of room you have, for the speakers, how far they should be able to distribute, or for the microphones, how far they are able to pick up the voices. And you mentioned room acoustics and room audio fencing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great technology to be able to define actually from where in the room people will be then detected from an audio perspective, so that you can perhaps have this solution into an open setting and then just define the setting where you're moving around and not picking up the sound from people that's outside of that definition. It's a great way to really have this creative experience and not really taking into other people disturbing that experience in your meeting.
Yeah, totally agree. So take considerations in terms of microphones. Of course, we also need displays as well. Now, here at Microsoft, there is no such thing in the MTR world or the Microsoft Teams Rooms world as a Teams Room certified display. The only real considerations we have in terms of a Teams Room is making sure the display is a 1080 display at the moment. And I know it's pretty difficult to get 1080 displays, and you'd still buy a 4K display, but you can use the DID part in between the Microsoft Teams Rooms and the screen itself to translate the resolution. We can change that, and we can do that. But the other main consideration is what we would always recommend is make sure the display has a HDMI CEC port. That way, Microsoft Teams Rooms devices can auto shut down the monitor if it detects nobody in the room because they've got proximity sensors. And then as soon as somebody walks into the room, it automatically lights everything back up as well. So apart from that, choose the right monitor or the right TV screen based on, one, the room size and also the meeting room persona. For example, if you have a smaller type of room where you want to use front row and you were thinking of adding a 55-inch screen in there, consider using maybe an 86-inch screen there if you're using front row as the default layout in that room. Maybe you want to have dual displays, and we always recommend, wherever possible, go with dual displays. So in the Microsoft world, whenever you're selling a Microsoft Teams Rooms device, normally you'd sell a Microsoft Teams Rooms device and then sell them a single display. The upsell of a single display is making sure it's a touchscreen. If you have it as a touchscreen, of course, you can then use the Microsoft Whiteboard as part of that meeting. The next upsell of that is having two screens, having dual screen. If you have dual screen, you get better experiences, especially in front row and some of the other layouts like grid view that we have, because we maximize on that screen estate size as well. So monitors aren't too complicated. It's just making sure you pick the correct one depending on what type of meeting is actually happening inside of that room. Of course, we also have some cable considerations to look at as well. Rule of thumb is use the original cables. If you are using longer cables, remember cables are rated for certain lengths, so try not to use any third-party ones. Use the official ones from that respected OEM partner as well.
Just giving you some insights of how to see a Teams room from a very high level. We're just defining the view of a small room in this case, and this is a slide that will build up. So every time we talk about a Teams Rooms device, it has a compute. It might not have a separate compute because it could be built into the device, the all-in-one device that we have been talking to. But it's a compute. That compute is a certified device from the perspective that we, together with the vendor, have certified the exact device type, the version of it, with the software that is being provided. So you can't just take any compute and then download a software, Teams Room software on it, because it has to be this certified. And that is for us to make sure that the experience and the updates and everything really is being done as we have tailored it. Because Teams Rooms devices, they are taken care of. They are being locked down, and we also manage them from the sense that for the Windows part, we update them each and every night, or we restart them, I would say, which make the eventual updates that might be out there being able to be downloaded. And we'll also have a refresh. So we have a restart, of course, that makes the device fresh in the morning when you enter the room. So everything that might have been congested during the day, it's like refreshed, being able to work again for you. So each and every night, a restart is being done to make the device being updated to the latest versions.
And I think just on this slide here, this is just a very basic slide in terms of what a basic kind of configuration looks like in terms of a small room. With Microsoft Teams Rooms devices, they're pretty much plug and play, USB plug and play for the most part. Of course, when we start moving into larger rooms, you then start adding table hubs and display hubs and replacing the USB cable to a Cat6 or a Cat5 cable. But effectively, everything is plug and play. And as long as, like Robert rightly mentioned, certified, you can pretty much mix and match different cameras, mic, speakers with a Microsoft Teams Rooms device. So be it a small room, a medium room, or a large room, it's pretty straightforward. Of course, you can get a lot more advanced and start adding in DSPs and audio mixers and things like that if you want to. But effectively, as long as it's a Teams certified piece of kit, it should work with a Microsoft Teams Rooms device. So now that we've had a look at kind of the basic components that build up a room and looked at room recommendations or room kind of assessments across there, the next thing I think that we really need to talk about is, well, how do we build up that room resource account? And of course, with room resource accounts, there's a number of different ways for you to actually go ahead and create a room resource account. With Microsoft Teams Rooms devices, these are designed for groups of people to come in. So they require a room resource account as opposed to a single O365 like username or password. So very, very important. With a Microsoft Teams Rooms device, it requires a room resource account or not a standard user account. Completely different thing. Now, when we look at room resource accounts, these can be kind of created in a number of different ways. Of course, you can use PowerShell, you can use the Teams Admin Center, and there's a few other ways that you can go ahead and create a room resource account. For today's session, we're going to keep it as simple as possible, and we're going to go ahead and show you a quick demo or effectively a few slides on how we would create a room resource account, right? So when we look at room resource accounts, it's pretty straightforward. Of course, when we look at the security aspect of a room resource account as well, there are different aspects that we can apply to it. Remember when I mentioned earlier on about do not treat these devices as Windows-based devices, treat them as appliance device. That still is completely true today. But when we start looking at things like Android devices now joining internet, where we now have the ability, when we look at things like conditional access policies and modern authentication and across the other devices as well, we try and build all of that as part of a room resource account and give you the ability to go in there and edit those options if required. Of course, we have what we call a Microsoft Teams Rooms admin guide made available online, which is a live document, so it gets updated regularly. That will give you exactly how to create a room resource account as well. So let's take a look at some of the steps on how you would create them. So when we look at room resource accounts, what I'll do is I'll build up a little slide for you just to give you the basic steps of what's required in terms of creating a room resource account, which you'll see here on screen today. So there's a number of different components when creating a room resource account, from creating an Exchange account all the way to actually the room resource account itself. But in a nutshell, let's take a look at, well, how do we build it? How do we apply this in the most easiest way possible? So we would always recommend, if at all possible, use the M365 Admin Center. And when you use the 365 Admin Center, of course, sign in as an admin account. You can sign in across there. And then on the left-hand side of the page, you can navigate to the Teams Admin Center across there. You'll see here on screen where the instructions are. So I'm going to click through these slides because it's pretty straightforward. You can't really go wrong. Click Add Resource button to create a new room. It then brings up, a page where you effectively can start filling out the details. So all your standard things about what's the name of the room, how many people can stay in the room, where's the location, etc., etc. So fill in the appropriate values across here as well. Once you've created the room, do give it a few minutes, all right? So it will take a few minutes to go ahead and start creating the room, but of course you can then start adding some additional bits in here as well. For example, the available scheduling options. So do you want the room only to be made available during work hours, or you can book it outside of work hours as an example. So make sure you've done that part. Once you've created the room, You then want to navigate to the users on the Teams admin center. And inside of the users, you'll see the name of the room that you've just created across there. Soon as you open up that room, first thing that you should do is change the password. So of course, Microsoft will try and give you a default alphanumeric password across there. But what you want to do is create an actual password. So hit the reset button on reset password, type in a new password, and make sure you remember that password, because you will need it later on when we start using or doing the out-of-box experience across there. So once you've changed the password, you can move over onto the next tab, and that's where we would go ahead and apply the license. Remember, as mentioned earlier on, you do need a standard or a premium license being applied. Whether you take premium or whether you take standard, it's the same kind of option. You need to assign that license to the room itself. So once you click licenses and apps across here, it will then give you a list of all the licenses that you have made available on your tenant effectively. And if you don't have it, you can click on the purchase button or the trial button and go ahead and start adding some more. Of course, if you need to go ahead and purchase more licenses, reach out to your CSP provider or reach out to your account manager and they will hopefully get you some licenses for you.
There's one pro tip here as well.
Sure.
That you, of course, when you do this, do it in advance. So you don't just do it and then go out to customer site and try to start it up, because it could take up to 24 hours before everything has flown through the Microsoft 365 cloud, where everything has been populated. So do this in advance, make it flow through, and then you go out to the customer. So create your resource account at least 24 hours before then applying the out-of-the-box experience, which we're going to go through now.
That's a great pro tip. So make sure you do that. In my experience, I've learned it happens pretty quick.
It does.
Anyway. But I guess the caveat is just to ensure that you give yourself enough time to create an account so that when you do walk into a room that has Microsoft Teams Rooms device in there, we can then run through the out-of-box experience. So let's take a look at the out-of-box experience of what it looks like. So let's imagine we've got a room already kitted out. We walk into the room, we power on the devices. This is the first screen that you'll be greeted with. So you will go through the standard kind of what language do you want, etc., etc. But once you've gone through that standard install piece of Windows, the first time that you switch on a Windows device, the Microsoft Teams Rooms app will automatically load up for you. You will get the terms and conditions pop up. Of course, read the terms and conditions, scroll down to the bottom, accept it, and hit the next button. Soon as you hit the next button, it then asks you for your room resource account. So that room resource account that we created a little earlier on, enter the email address and enter that password that we created as well as part of that.
And if you've done that, and if you have created the resource account with modern authentication, make sure that you also tick in that box here, because otherwise you will have trouble signing in.
Yeah, great pro tip there. And I've learned that. It's happened to me a few times. It's thrown me off. Nothing was working until I toggled that modern authentication switch across there. Now, of course, depending on how your infrastructure is set up, you do have the option across here to switch on Teams only mode, Skype only mode, or a bit of both if you're a hybrid setup across there. So select the right one. Then 9 times out of 10, the default one is the one that will just work fine for you, especially if you're going through that transition. But if you are a Teams only house, you do have a new Microsoft Teams only mode option across there. Make sure you select that one as well. Cool. Hit next. Pretty straightforward. You've then got the finish button. As soon as you hit finish, your device will then start doing a configuration, and it will automatically restart for you as well. Soon as it restarts, what you'll notice across the top bar is it will say signing in. And providing everything has gone well and you've created your account correctly and your network connectivity is all on par, then you will be greeted with the next screen across here as well. The screen that was previous, the one that we had the sign in button across the top, if anything was to fail, it will pop up there to say unable to sign into Teams. That's when you will have to go in and do a bit of troubleshooting across on there as well.
And one thing then is perhaps try to sign in with your credentials into a web browser instead, just to make sure where this might have been faulted during the process. So try to sign in with the same thing, but just with a web browser to see if that's an issue or not.
Again, a great pro tip there, Robert. So if you create the account, try it out before you actually do it on the device itself. So we do have a few additional options that we can use to configure Teams Rooms devices as well. It's what we call post setup. So post setup, we can go ahead and change some additional settings on the machine itself. Remember, if you have enrolled this into Teams Admin Center or into Microsoft Teams Rooms Premium, you can access a majority of these settings online, and you can push out those settings to your machine. However, if you're already there in the room, hit the three dots, which brings up the More menu, and it then brings up kind of our settings. Now, no one can enter settings unless you have administrator rights. So again, it's that little security thing that we put in that a standard user cannot go in and completely mess up the device. As soon as you hit settings, it will ask you for a password. So you will have an administrator password that you need to add in. Now, by default, Microsoft Teams Rooms devices have SFB as a default password. We always recommend one of the first things that you do is go in there and change that password, change the admin password across there. In fact, some OEM devices will prompt you to do it as part of that out-of-box experience. Now that we're in the settings page, there's a whole bunch of different things that we can do. The first page is effectively the about screen, so we can see what version of the application that we're on. If you did completely nothing on the device, these devices will automatically update themselves. There's nothing for you to do. And around 2 o'clock, 2:30 a.m. every morning, the system will run a script where it reboots itself and it will apply any updates that require a restart. And this is also Windows updates as well as MTR app updates as well. So if you did nothing, the device will maintain and update itself. If you really need to update, do check out the Microsoft Teams Rooms admin guide, and we have instructions up there that will tell you how to manually update devices as well. Let's take a quick look at a few of the settings that we have. So across here, we've got the Meetings tab. Inside of the Meetings tab, you'll see a whole range of different options made available, ranging from things like third-party meetings. So if you want to use what we call direct guest join, the ability to dial into a Zoom room or a Cisco WebEx room, you can switch on those options across there. Of course, when you do select those, sometimes some settings will require a restart of the machine. So as soon as you hit save and exit, it will effectively reboot the machine for you. And then, those settings then get applied across there as well. We also have a few additional options as well. So what you can see across here is what it looks like if you wanted to send feedback. So if there's an issue with the machine, as an example, you have the ability to send the logs, not just to Microsoft, but you can actually assign an email address for your own support center or your customer's support center. And that, if there was an issue with the machine or we need to send back logs, that would automatically trigger an email over to the email address that you've inserted there, as well as Microsoft as well, and it will actually have the logs there so you can go in and try and work out if there's any issues that you need to look at. Of course, when we look at some additional settings, we have coordinated meetings as well. So if you have a Surface Hub in the mix and you want to select a Surface Hub to dial in at the same time, you'd use the coordinated meetings option. If you have additional kind of audio, visual, different cameras, different mics, different speakers inside of the room, this screen here will allow you to select what is the default camera. Now, of course, Robert, we spoke a little earlier on about content cameras.
Right.
All right. So on this screen, you have the ability for you to pick and choose what is your default camera and what is a content camera. And that will automatically add a button onto the machine, which will give you a content camera button if you've applied a content camera. Now, one of the latest updates that got pushed out recently was multiple camera support. And again, from this device or from this settings screen, you're able to pick what your default camera is. And then while you're inside of a call, you're able to select an additional camera to go along with your meeting across there. Now, with some builds, some customers may have things like intelligent speakers. So you don't need to use like the default speaker that you've got on your MTR. Maybe you want to use an external speaker like an intelligent speaker. This is the screen where you would effectively go and select the right one. You can adjust the sensitivity that goes in there as well. And you can have a preview of what your camera looks like without you actually being there inside of a call. Of course, we also love to customize things as well, right? So we love to change what the themes are on the device itself. So this particular screen allows you to select from a default list of different backgrounds and colors that we have on Microsoft Teams Rooms devices. So if you wanted to change the look to a purple look, if you wanted to change it to an orangey look, there's a whole selection that sit inside of these themes as well.
And this actual one, I think that's a custom-made version of a background.
Yeah.
So that's not available in here, but you could also apply that, of course, but you do that through an XML file instead. So you apply a script to your device, and then you put your replacement background in that XML file, and then you just place that onto your actual device to be able then to have a specific, perhaps tailor-made custom for your company or something. And I think that's a great way also to have instructions placed on that one so that you can really guide your users on how to start a meeting or do something else that's in that meeting room.
See, I love that idea, Robert. And we see a lot of our customers doing that, where, yes, we have the default themes in there, but rightly, as you mentioned, you do have the ability to create your own kind of custom backgrounds to go along with it. So a lot of organizations maybe just want to add their logo, but I love your idea of where you said, hey, put some instructions there as well. So we mentioned a little earlier on about how important training actually is in terms of educating staff members on how to use a device. Would it not be great for you to create your own background where it actually says, hey, to start a meeting, press the Meet Now button, or to click here or click there. So you absolutely have the ability to go ahead and create a custom background. Now, there are instructions that you'll find on the Microsoft Teams Rooms admin guide again. And just like Robert said, you do need to go in and edit an XML file and then place your file on the Microsoft Teams Rooms device. But effectively, you can effectively put whatever background that you want. And one thing that I love is if you have a dual screen layout, those backgrounds look awesome, absolutely awesome across there. So again, another reason why you'd want to go dual screen as opposed to be going single screen across there.
Finally, can you only do this on the console, or can you do it some other way? I guess you could go to Teams Admin Center instead, because it's not always that you have connection to the actual room and to be in that room to do this, and it might not be that easy either way to do multiple things. So you could also use Teams Admin Center and to do these settings, of course, from that graphical interface and not having to go to the office and to the actual room. So the same settings that we have here could also be applied from Teams Admin Center. And
that's a really valid point as well, a really good point. The fact that Teams Admin Center gives you the ability to go ahead and configure all of these devices remotely. So we'll find 99% of the time while you're configuring a room, while you're physically there, you can go ahead and access the settings directly on the machine and change what you want. However, if you're maintaining or managing a whole range of different rooms, simply by using Teams Admin Center or using a different management platform like Intune as an example, Teams Admin Center seems to be the most easiest one, and most customers tend to use that. But you will have access to all the settings, and you can apply the settings and even reboot the devices. You even have the ability to create configuration files for like Android devices as an example, where you can multiple deploy these devices. So we do have some plans at Microsoft to make multiple deployments a little easier than they are today. Watch this space. We will of course announce any new changes that will come through our standard channels. With that in mind, that kind of wraps up our basic Teams technical training for Microsoft Teams Rooms devices. Robert, I presume we have additional training if you want to learn more?
Sure, and we will do boot camps. We have boot camps available since before, and there will also be a new boot camp session or new boot camp sessions coming out later in April. So we really urge you to go out there to get those trainings, a lot of updated great content from our colleagues at Corp. And with that, I think you will be able also to really go out to your customers and feel confident to have these discussions with them.
Absolutely. So this wraps up our basic session today. And just like Robert said, if you need to learn more, please do reach out to your Microsoft account managers, reach out to Robert or myself, or go online and have a look at some of the different sessions or the boot camps that we have online. With that in mind, thank you so much for listening to us today. And Robert, I'd like to give you the opportunity to say thank you as well.
Thank you so much. I look at this camera. Thank you so much for listening in, and let's keep in touch.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.